Louisiana Eats is brought to you with support from Zatarain's, maker of New Orleans pantry staples like Creole mustard, fish fry, and jambalaya mix since 1889. Recipes and more at zatarains.com. From our studios in the Southern Food and Beverage Museum in New Orleans, this is Louisiana Eats. I'm Poppy Tooker. When it comes to historic restaurants, there's no place like home, if you're lucky enough to call New Orleans home. The Crescent City is blessed with an abundance of restaurants with histories over a century old and tales too delicious to believe. We begin the delicious telling with Chef Chris Montero at the Napoleon House. As it turns out, Chris is not just an accomplished chef, but he's also a passionate preservationist and historian. We investigate the historic French Quarter property from the bar to the cupola and all points in between, including the former living quarters of the Impastato family. Then, we sit down with Chef Slade Rushing, who was given the daunting task of creating a 21st century culinary profile at the venerable Brennan's restaurant on Royal Street, while honoring the tradition of breakfast at Brennan's as set forth by founder Owen Brennan decades ago. And sometimes it's the food itself that tells the story. That's the case at the Roosevelt Hotel, where Chef Carl Cushenberry's fried chicken is legendary. We visit Chef Carl in the kitchen there to learn what elevates his fried chicken to rock star status and get some cooking tips as well. We're taking a delicious trip back in time on this week's Louisiana Eats.
My name is Chris Montero. I'm the general manager and executive chef of the Napoleon House.
Over the course of his 2-decade career with the Ralph Brennan Restaurant Group, Chef Chris Montero has played a major role in several notable ventures. He served as executive chef of Bacco's in the French Quarter for 12 years, opened and ran Café B in Metairie, and more recently launched Cafe Noma in the Museum of Art, a project he continues to oversee and take great pride in. Now, at nearly 60 years old, Chef Chris's latest role as keeper of the historic Napoleon House is somewhat of a feather in the cap of his professional career.
I'm a kid in the candy store right now, yes.
With its funky European vibe and signature menu of items like Pim's cups and muffulettas, the Napoleon House was a place the New Orleans-born chef knew about his whole life. But his interest goes beyond the bar and dining room. As it turns out, Chris is a lifelong history buff and considers history, especially New Orleans history, to be his second greatest passion next to food. When he was chosen to be the executive chef of the iconic restaurant in 2015, he soon found himself engaging in over 2 centuries worth of stories and lore centered around the 2 families that had previously owned it.
It's kind of cool. 225 years of history, and the first 100 year was the Girod family, and the second 100 years the Impastato family. And all of the history that I know was just word of mouth history from the Impastatos. Some of it, like most oral histories, it gets convoluted and crosses over, and much like the history of my family, but a lot of it's inaccurate. And we've procured and hired a historic architect, Robbie Cangelosi. In the last 3 years since we've uncovered so much that we didn't know about the building, and it's absolutely fascinating.
Chris met the Louisiana Eats crew in the Napoleon House bar, where portraits of former employees and Napoleon Bonaparte line the walls. The chef was eager to give us a tour of the landmark and fill us in on its history, beginning with the transition of ownership from the Impastatos to Ralph Brennan in 2015.
The Impastato family had been running this all of their life. The second generation, that was Sal Impastato and his 4 sisters, had been running this from the time they were children, and it's all they'd ever done. And they were getting kind of tired. They're all in their mid-70s to early 80s, and they were ready to pass this torch on. And what happened were we, as you probably know, regained and restored the original Brennan's restaurant on Royal Street, we being Ralph Brennan and the group. And while we were going through that restoration, there were a lot of articles being written, and most of them focused on Ralph's intent of retaining the family history and preserving that history, etc. And that caught the eye of Sal Impastato. And he reached out to Ralph Brennan, kind of behind the scenes, and said, would you be interested in taking over my family's restaurant? With Ralph said yes, on the phone, without hearing any details. And that process took about a year, the negotiations. No lawyers, no real estate, just Ralph and Sal Impastato, old-fashioned. But somewhere in that period, Ralph called me and said, Chris, you can't say anything to anyone, but do I have something for you? You're going to love it, right? Because I'm a history nut, always have been. I was a history major in college, and I've always been interested in New Orleans, not just culinary history, but I've loved the architecture and the culture and so on. And he said, man, do I have something you're going to love, and it's going to be your retirement plan. So I was just thrilled and had no idea the breadth and depth of what was in this building.
Guiding us through the decaying splendor of the restaurant's first floor, Chef Chris led us upstairs. Oh, the space! Formerly apartments, the space was converted to make room for private parties and receptions. Boasting carved wooden fireplace mantels, ornate chandeliers, and handsome doorways, the elegant rooms were beautifully preserved, as if they were suspended in time.
So the first thing that was a big surprise to me was that the Napoleon House is a National Historic Landmark, and it's not by historical designation, the Napoleon House. It's called the Girod House, right? Nicholas Girod was the original owner and proprietor of this business and this home, and he was a very prominent citizen in 1800 in New Orleans, the wealthiest family, the 3 Girod brothers. He also has the distinction of being the first elected mayor to the city of New Orleans in 1812. We began building this property, the Girod brothers, in 1797. The oldest parts of the building date back to the late 1700s, just after the last fires here in the French Quarter. And it was their business offices at first, and the corner was an open lot. And when the oldest brother died in the early 1800s, Nicholas Girod wanted to build a residence on what was the business property. And that's where we're sitting right now. We're sitting in the apartment of Nicholas Girod that was finished in 1812, which also was the year he was elected mayor of New Orleans. So not only was he a wealthy businessman, but he's the first elected mayor to the city. He's a Frenchman, right? You're going to love this. He spoke no English. So the first mayor of New Orleans, after it became part of America, after the Louisiana Purchase, spoke no English. He really actually didn't have a lot of admiration towards Americans. And they said, I want to do his inauguration in English. And he said, maybe these Americans should learn to speak French, right? And he refused to speak any English in his inauguration. It's just a New Orleans thing, right? So this guy is the mayor of New Orleans in 1812. And then he's elected for a second term in 1814. Well, we all know what 1814 was in New Orleans. The beginning of the Battle of New Orleans, the end of 1814. January of 1815, the Battle of New Orleans takes place in Chalmette. Very historic event. Well, who's the mayor at the time is sitting here in the apartment we're in. This is Nicholas Girod. He's also in charge of the Creole militia, and he was liaison to Andrew Jackson in helping to collaborate with the Creoles, the French-speaking Creoles. But really what he was instrumental in was he had these ties to Jean Lafitte and Dominic Eu. Dominic Yu was a general in Napoleon's army, one of the facts that come into play at the end of the story. So therefore, historians say that Girod's involvement with Jackson was tremendously instrumental in this victory because of the people he was able to tie together with Jackson and his army from out of the state, and he had all the locals. We have this overwhelming victory in the Battle of New Orleans, and Girod's even more popular here in the city amongst the Creoles. He gets all the credit with locals. The rest of the country, and Jackson goes on to become president and so on. But a few years later, Napoleon Bonaparte is captured a second time and exiled to a remote island in the Atlantic, right? And this is 1818. After Waterloo, right? His second big war campaigns that he's famous for, and he's captured, he's exiled to this remote island and around the city of New Orleans. That is a big deal. And the buzz starts going all around town. The reason that he's making this apartment more and more opulent all the time, he's adding a cupola to the roof, and he's doing restoration to these apartments on the top floor that no people had lived up there. The reason he's doing all these embellishments is to offer exile to Napoleon. They're gonna rescue him with Dominic Yu, right? And that story catches wildfire around the city. It's all the buzz. It's very well documented that everyone was talking about it. And then what happens? Napoleon, he kicks off and dies, right? 1821, he dies suddenly. And there you have it, right? 200 years it's been frozen in time. Everyone in the city were convinced that this was going to be Napoleon's house. So shortly thereafter, it began being referred to as the house Napoleon was going to live in, right? And it just never went away. We have 200 years of this great story, and hey, we don't know that it wasn't true because there's no documentation of any discussions about it other than what the locals were talking about.
Do you know much about what happened with the property between the Girods and the Impastatos?
I know a bit. I mean, we're learning a lot more every day. So during the Girod era, it was owned by the family all the way until the late 1800s. Girod died just before the Civil War in his 80s. He's buried in the St. Louis Cemetery right down the street, very near Marie Laveau. But his family his heirs retained the property until the turn of that century. And he left his enormous fortune to charity, the vast majority. He's one of the greatest philanthropists the cities have ever known, Nicholas Girod. Louis Armstrong was raised in an orphanage that was built with funds from Nicholas Girod's fortune that he left to these charities. But the rest of his family had lots of wealth also. There were other brothers. And they retained the property until the late 1800s when it's lost between 1900 and 1912. And we're going to figure it out. When it changed hands with a couple of leases. So one of those lessees who we've not been able to identify started a little small grocery store, which is now the main bar of the Napoleon House. We know that because we've got a picture in the other room from 1906 that has a Laborde grocery, right? And we don't know who that is. And then in 1914, a young man by the name of Giuseppe Impastato, who was in his mid-20s, saved enough money, a Sicilian immigrant, very working class, to buy what was once the mayor's mansion here in New Orleans.
Coming up next, our Napoleon House tour continues as Chef Chris Montero shares the history and culinary legacy of the building's 20th century owners, the Impastato family. Louisiana Eats returns after the break. I'm Poppy Tooker, and you're listening to Louisiana Eats, edible content for Louisiana food lovers. Louisiana Eats is brought to you with major support from Rouse's Markets, from Camellia Brand, Beans Done Right, a New Orleans tradition since 1923, and from Ralph Brennan's Redfish Grill, home of the award-winning barbecued oyster Poor Boy and 9 varieties of fresh Gulf fish caught and served daily. Lunch, dinner, and private events at 115 Bourbon Street in the French Quarter. If you're just joining us, we've been touring the Napoleon House, an iconic New Orleans restaurant with over 2 centuries of history. Chris Montero, executive chef and history buff, has been on quite a tour of discovery since Sal Impastato handed over the Napoleon House keys to Ralph Brennan in 2015. 2 generations of the Impastato family owned and operated the Napoleon House since 1920, when Giuseppe, Uncle Joe Impastato, purchased the home of former New Orleans Mayor Nicholas Girod. After Reconstruction, the French Quarter had transitioned from an opulent, cosmopolitan center to a working-class neighborhood with a large immigrant population. By the time Joe Impastato purchased the Napoleon House, so many Sicilian immigrants lived in the quarter that it was often referred to as Little Palermo.
Uncle Joe, Giuseppe Impastato, this young man, had a dream of opening a Sicilian market. He wanted a grocery store. And that's originally what it was. We've got just a handful of pictures of the Napoleon House as a Sicilian grocery, with canned tomatoes on the walls and little aprons. That started slowly in 1914, but we do know that before the Depression era, it had started selling sandwiches and wine and beer. There was some rumors of them distilling beer here, and that became a popular outlet for these Irish immigrants and the Italian workers, a real roughneck working class kind of grocery/bar, right? And apparently that really caught traction. In Prohibition, Uncle Joe started selling a little more wine. I do know that Uncle Joe brewed some beer. So that after Prohibition, the focus of the Napoleon House was a bar room.
When did he carry the Victrola downstairs?
Somewhere in the 30s. Uncle Joe, Giuseppe Impastato, is a huge fan of opera. That was his passion. And he started bringing the Victrola down into when it started becoming a more popular bar and playing classical music.
Whose record?
Look at the records. Those are Uncle Joe's records.
Those are Uncle Joe's. Oh, my goodness.
Walking through the banquet rooms on the 2nd floor, Chris led us into a 4-room apartment, the former home of Joe Impastato.
This is where Giuseppe passed away in 1985 at 100 years old. And when he passed away, Sal and Vivian, who were running it in the 70s, because he retired in 1947, Joe, after the World War II, and left it to his baby brother Peter and his son Sal. And they ran it all the way from the early 70s until reaching out to us. And Sal and his wife lived in what is now the banquet room in the front, and Uncle Joe lived in the back. And the moment Uncle Joe passed away at 100, a beloved family member, Sal said, finally, I can create a banquet space in the bedroom, because Uncle Joe wouldn't allow any commercial business in the family residence, right? This was all for family upstairs. My goal is to hopefully create Uncle Joe's apartment as a dining space.
Oh, that
right?
would be great.
And we'll do seated dinners in these back bedrooms, but they're amazing, right? And this is the old section of the building. We're standing above the 1700. Below this parquet floor are the some of the oldest flooring in the city of New Orleans, dating from the late 1700s.
Also, directly below us was the Napoleon House's famous downstairs bar. I asked Chris to explain the story of how the Pimm's Cup cocktail came to be a classic menu item under Joe's leadership.
Couple of things that transpired. He wasn't necessarily a fan of hard drinking and alcohol and whiskey drinking Irishmen. He liked wine and beer and low alcohol. And he introduced a drink called a Pimm's Cup downstairs to the bar. He was familiar with this low alcohol drink from London. That was kind of a newfangled thing, apparently, when he was young. And he introduced Pimm's Cups to New Orleans. And we know this from the Pimm's folks that have a history, that this was one of the first venues in America that started importing Pimm's, number one, because of Uncle Joe. So we like to give him all the credit, as the Pimm's people do, for being the largest distributor or sales venue for Pimm's Cup in America, by far. There's nowhere close. So we're proud of that, right?
Now, I know you must know the answer to this. When does the muffaletta appear here?
It's a little convoluted, but this is what we know. We know that he liked po' boys, Uncle Joe. His cousin owned the Union Bakery that made a lot of the Italian bread, the Italian twist, and the muffalata loaves. We know that Central Grocery takes credit, and rightly so, for introducing the muffalatas to New Orleans, but that was a relative of Giuseppe that sold the muffalatas. Somewhere in the 20s, he began selling more and more sandwiches. And, you know, the muffalata just had to be because it was his cousin that sold the loaf. And he wanted to sell it hot, though. He didn't think it needed to be a cold deli sandwich. And that's been our reputation ever since, right? But, you know, I'm a big fan of all of it. So I strive to do here is to be as authentic and integral to those recipes. You know, Ralph Brennan told me something the day I started here. He said, our number one mission is to honor the legacy of the Impastato family. He is just enamored and loves the fact that we were fortunate enough to keep this great entity going. And that's what we do. I make the original recipes.
Next, Chris led us up a grand centuries-old staircase, taking us from the second to the third floor. On the next level, Chris showed us a number of apartments overlooking Charters and St. Louis streets.
Oh my goodness, what a view.
Looking around, I couldn't help but feel that with each staircase we climbed, we were going further back in time. Ascending the final staircase, the feeling was simply overwhelming. It was a place where time had stopped.
And then we go into the real-time warp now, right? Up into what we refer to as the attic.
Well, tell me about this space.
So this has been the most intriguing space, and the one that we still are trying to sort out the details, but this is what we think we know. We're gonna determine a lot of this more soon. When I got here, the Impastato story of this space was the attic used to be dormitories for sailors in the 1800s, right? Because the Girod family were in the import-export and business on the river. But as soon as I brought an architect up here, an historic architect, he took one look and said, these were not, he said that maybe after the Civil War, pre-Civil War, these were slave quarters. Because the dead giveaway is these traditional servant stairs, which are here that originally went all the way down to the ground floor. But since that presumption was made, I've done more research, and I've now come to identify the slaves who actually lived here, right?
How in the world did you do that?
I did that by Facebook and social media and looking up a site of an author who wrote a fictional novel about Napoleon in New Orleans, but she had a thread of people that were communicating with her about her book, and one of them were descendants of Nicholas Girod, who live in Evangeline Parish, where he had apparently there are a lot of Girod descendants in that area of the state. So we began communicating with them. Then I did some research from her book about who were the slaves owned by Girod, of which he had hundreds, but only 3 that lived in his apartment in Napoleon House. And here's where it gets really cool for me. There were 2 men and a woman who lived up here in the 3rd floor, and they were personal house slaves of Nicholas Girod. And the daughter of the woman who lived here went on to marry Nicholas Girod's nephew, who inherited all of his property, including the big plantation. Now that was pre-Civil War, was relatively unheard of. That it wasn't uncommon for marriages or rather children from slave owners and slaves, but for an aristocratic family to have married the daughter of the slave who lived upstate is super cool, right?
Yeah.
It kind of shows that of that era, there was a different mindset amongst some of the property owners, and their descendants of this woman who lived here are the Girod family that lives in Evangeline Parish. And the daughter who communicated with me did not know that. So she's coming soon to come visit where her 6th great-grandmother lived in 1800s. She's bringing the family tree, the genealogy tree, and we're going to trace everyone back here to this
Incredible.
act.
Incredible.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And we've just discovered that literally in the last 6 months.
Our final destination was the jewel of this architectural crown, an octagonal cupola that provided us with a breathtaking view of the Quarter and Mississippi River.
So This was something that Girod built as a bit of a fancy.
Again, another area that we're trying to understand, like why did he build an Italian cupola on top of his Creole, Spanish, Caribbean architecture? Well, because of his business, in 1800, you'd have been looking right down on the wharf, and perhaps it was a business consideration, but some of the writings indicate that he was just showing off, right? That he was envious of the cupolas on the cabildo, and that he wanted to have the tallest residence in the city of New Orleans, which it was, because the only thing taller would have been the cathedral and the cabildo at the time. So maybe he was just kind of flaunting his wealth at the time. But we don't know. Either way you look at it, this is one of the most integral aspects of the building. If you look at all the old paintings in the historic collection, they all feature the cupola on the roof. We're really proud of it. We plan to take great care of it, and we're going to make sure it's around for another 100 or 200 years for people to experience.
This is just fantastic. Thank you so much.
It is my pleasure, as always.
Chef, preservationist, and historian Chris Montero of the Napoleon House. Historic New Orleans restaurants have an immortal way about them. Sometimes it feels as though they've been open for an eternity. But in our 300-year-old city, there comes a time when iconic restaurants need to be renovated and reborn. Such was the case when Brennan's restaurant underwent a major overhaul that culminated in the fall of 2014. With this renovation came new owners within the Brennan family and a new executive chef, Slade Rushing. We invited Slade into the studio to reflect on this pivotal transition in his career, starting from his first day on the job.
We met at Brennan's while the construction was going on, and there were bobcats pushing dirt literally where our bar is. And here's this historical property that, you know, a lot of times people say, hey, look, we're going to renovate this place, or we're going to bring it back like it was, or vice versa, and they go cheap on things. And I walk in there, I see bobcats pushing dirt, and I see all this amazing work that was being done. And it made me realize that these guys are the real deal. They really understand how to build a restaurant for success. And in 2014, it was probably 6 to 7 months before we opened the restaurant that things started moving towards the opening.
Needless to say, we all watched closely in the news as the auctioning process went on, and because every New Orleanian, I believe, in essence, feels some ownership with places like Brennan's. That's our spot. And at one point, one of the last things that was auctioned off was, of course, the name and recipes. Were there surprises in these archival recipes?
The recipes that I looked at a few of them, I didn't want to be influenced by it too much. I don't know if that makes sense, but to me, there's a lot of good about not knowing. I grew up down here, and I've lived in a lot of places, and I used to eat this food so much growing up that I understood the passion and, let's just say, the substance of what makes good Creole food, because my dad was a real estate broker, and a lot of his clients came from the New Orleans area. And this is back in the 80s. They were buying land in Mississippi for weekend retreats. And they would give him cookbooks and invite us over to New Orleans for Mardi Gras and to go eat at these nice restaurants. And I think New Orleans was a really special place back in the 80s. We had a lot of amazing European chefs and so forth. Let me just put it like this. Bananas Foster's is a classic example. There's certain things you just don't change about Brennan's. The eggs Hussard is another example. I mean, we've elevated it, but we've given the best representation that I believe the dish. We put a lot of love in the dish. We use a blend of mushrooms, hashimeji mushrooms, maitakes, and shiitakes, instead of just one kind of mushroom. We make a red wine sauce with amazing marrow bones and so forth. And other ones like the soft shell charters that I ran as a special today is a classic dish. We freshen up things, but they're, it's just like when Alice and I were in New York, we knew the food tasted good down here, but it needed refinement. This is where I do so with respect. But when it comes to the customers, there are a lot of customers that remember Brennan's from back in the day, and it's changed. I would say probably 80% of them really love what we're doing because they can see the past and they can appreciate the innovation, and they understand what we're doing, and they appreciate the service that we have and the space. It still is familiar enough to what they remember, because we haven't changed Brennan's that much, the blueprint wise. We've added some nice touches, some different styles of the room, but we've tried to retain the substance of what makes Brennan's. So yes, innovation in the past, it's a balancing act,
Were you nervous?
Oh yeah, but see, if you don't have nerves, then
It's
why are
stage
you
fright's
living?
everything, right? You got to have that adrenaline.
You got to be nervous. I mean, nothing makes me tick more than pressure. I love pressure. I'm the guy that crams for the test. That's what I like. That's what I enjoy.
You must have been very nervous the day that Ella Brennan finally walked through the doors again. I suspect even Ralph must have been a little nervous that day. What was that like for you as the chef to know that Ella herself was coming back to Brennan's?
It was very special. Ella called me over and wanted me to sit with her, and she didn't want anybody else around. And she leaned over to me and she told me a lot of things that I'm going to keep to myself about the opening of Brennan's and what Brennan's was to her. And it was a special moment. It was great to have her in that building, and I didn't realize that she hadn't been back there in so many years. It was one of those nights,
Yeah. Everybody's measure of the greatest achievement for American chefs is that James Beard Award. Well, since the day you hit the door at Brennan's, you've been getting that nomination. Do you think that it is harder for you because of the volume?
It's kind of funny because after a 600-person brunch or a 300-person dinner, it takes a lot of work and a lot of people to trust. I have to trust a lot of people, a lot of chefs to execute that, and a lot of servers are cooking steak Diane tableside. I'm not cooking that, but I'm setting it up. I'm making the sauces. We're doing the preparations for it. There's a lot of hands that touch the food, and I have to trust people. If I was cooking for 20 or 30 people and touching every plate like chefs we hope to do, it might be a little bit easier to achieve that award, but I don't do what I do to get awards. I don't. I'm not really, that award wouldn't change me if I ever got it. I still am going to be the same person. I love what I do. It's great to be nominated, but it is what it is. I don't let that, I don't make excuses. I don't really care that people, they do less numbers than me and they win it. I don't think about any of that, This is like 2-a-days in football every day. Like when I was in Mississippi in August, sweating, this is 2-a-days in football every day. And that's why I do it, because I love it, because I love the challenge. And I don't look down, never look down. I just keep looking forward. I keep pushing my chefs for success, and hopefully we'll get there. And my cooks too. I love teaching them, and I'm passionate every day. It's funny, I've been doing this for a while, and some people say I'm burned out. I've had moments where I thought I was burned out before, but I'm not burned out. I'm enjoying what I'm doing. I feel like I'm hitting my best stride culinary-wise. Like I'm getting comfortable with what I know, and I'm learning to take things off the plate and just trust the beauty of ingredients more. So I'm very happy, you know.
That was Slade Rushing, executive chef at Brennan's. Does New Orleans boast the oldest restaurant in the nation? Stay tuned, and we'll answer that question when we come right back. I'm Poppy Tooker, and you're listening to Louisiana Eats, edible content for Louisiana food lovers. Louisiana Eats is brought to you with major support from Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen. Are you a bar or restaurant owner? Or do you work in a bar or restaurant? Get involved this year with Dine Out for Life, Crescent Care's largest annual fundraiser. This year, we're making a full week of it, starting on Sunday, June 2nd, with a dim sum drag brunch at Maypop, sponsored by Monkey Shoulder. They're taking brunch reservations at Maypop now, but every restaurant and bar can be involved in this year's Dine Out for Life. All proceeds from Dine Out for Life benefit Crescent Care, a full-service health provider with sliding fees designed specially for the hospitality industry. Learn more at crescentcarehealth.org. Here's this week's culinary quiz question, brought to you with support from Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen. Does New Orleans boast the oldest restaurant in the nation? Actually, no. That distinction belongs to Delmonico's in New York City. Their history begins in 1827, when a pair of Swiss brothers, John and Peter Delmonico, invested $20,000 in gold coins to open a cafe they called Delmonico's. Originally serving French pastry, by 1831 they had evolved into a fine French restaurant. There at Delmonico's, many classic American dishes were invented, such as Eggs Benedict and Lobster Newburg. But it's important to note that while Delmonico's is the oldest restaurant in the nation, it has changed hands several times. But here in New Orleans, Antoine's restaurant, second to Delmonico's in age, is still the oldest continuously operating family-owned restaurant in the U.S., thanks to Rick and Lisa Blunt, who today keep the home fires burning on St. Louis Street in the French Quarter. I'm Poppy Tooker, and at Antoine's, they're always serving some real Louisiana Eats. New Orleans' Roosevelt Hotel enjoys a rich history, spanning more than 125 years. Opening in 1893 as the Grunwald Hotel, it was lavish from the start. It's even rumored that Huey Long planned the construction of Airline Highway just to shorten his travel time from the state capitol in Baton Rouge to the Roosevelt Sazerac Bar and Huey's favorite Ramus Gin Fizz. Imagine our surprise to find that on Mondays in that grand establishment, they're frying chicken. Chef Carl Cushenberry recently invited me into his kitchen to show me a little something about how he creates his legendary fried chicken.
This is basically flour, and salt. Come this way here. And this is flour and black pepper. See the pepper?
Uh-huh.
And this is just plain water with something else. See the stuff at the bottom?
Yeah. I suspect if you had to ask me, I might guess that there's maybe some cayenne, some paprika,
Keep going.
maybe a little vinegar.
You smell the vinegar? I told him not to put too much in. Do you smell it though?
No,
There's a vinegar in there, yeah.
I'm a cook.
Really? Come, wait a minute. Wait. You have a degree in cooking, and you don't know how to fry chicken?
I went to that fancy French cooking school, you know.
Yeah, they
I
took your
can
money?
do it, but I
Did
can't.
they take your money?
Yeah, they took my money.
And you don't know how to fry chicken?
I got robbed, huh?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I hope you're gonna correct things.
You want to learn how to fry chicken?
Yes, sir.
Today.
Today.
Right now. Today, you're going to learn today, babe. I said that.
Okay.
Now, you can watch, but don't ask no questions here.
Yes, sir. Whatever you say. It's your kitchen. It's your rules.
Going in the flour.
In the flour.
You got to learn to shake off the excess, because if you don't, you're going to have too much of flour. People want to eat chicken. You know what kind of chicken this is? Lick-lipping. Good chicken.
It's good chicken.
Lick-lipping, good fried chicken. That's
I knew
right.
it would be.
This is that batter I told you got flour, and something else.
Yeah.
This is it here. It's a different type of flour that we get from in New York or somewhere over there. But we mix with that to make the chicken crunchy.
It's flour and it's your secret ingredients that you're not sharing.
Right.
Okay.
You see my taster, William? Step over here. Look at my food taste.
He's your food taster?
He only weighed 110 pounds when he got here. Look at him. You think- That's a good co-worker of mine. So therefore, you know we doing good with chicken. You feel me? So now, frying chicken comes with a good, clean deep fry. So that's fresh grease. Make sure your grease is hot enough and it's set at the proper temperature.
And what's the proper temperature?
Not at 350. Right before 350 here.
Right before 350.
Yeah, because at 350 to get too dark.
So about what, 340,
340,
345?
yeah, somewhere around that range. I've never told nobody else this here. When I start putting all that chicken in this deep fry here, the key thing is you put it in there and you let it sit.
And you don't touch it.
Don't touch it. Let it cook for about 5 minutes. That way the crust and the flour will firm up. And once it done firm up, you can start to rotate it. Rotate it while it's in here. And that way all the chicken will start cooking, right? Does that make good sense?
Total sense. Yeah, don't you think that when you put the chicken in the oil, if you move it around too much, for one thing, it absorbs the oil.
Exactly.
That's what I think.
Right. And
So if you're getting it in there and you're getting that hard surface, you're sealing it up so it can't absorb the oil, right?
Right. Let me know when we go to commercial here.
How much chicken do you fry here on a Monday on average?
Well, due to the fact that just started this here, every Monday gets different. Last week we did about 2 cases of chicken. So this week we're hoping to do maybe 2.5. See how that one's starting to float? That guy over there. And you're gonna see that leg, it's gonna turn upside down.
It's a beautiful color.
Look, you see that leg right there?
I see it.
It's almost there. And look at that thigh, look.
It's
Look how pretty
beautiful.
that is.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
Want to take a picture?
After I took some lovely photographs of Carl's lip-licking fried chicken, we retired to a large dining room to finish our lesson and eat a little fried chicken.
Carl, how did you start here at the Roosevelt? Are you from here?
Yes, ma'am.
So where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up at Uptown, off Chabatulas and Napoleon.
Did you ever have any idea you were going to end up at the Roosevelt in the kitchen?
No, it ain't like I sit down and say, well, I want to learn how to fry chicken and be the best at it. No, because I was watching a program last night and, like a guy, he was a sports player. He said his parents asked him a long time ago when he was about 13 years, Billy, what you want to do when you grow up? Oh, I want to play baseball all my life. I want to strike out so many all my life. And I thought about it. I said, well, nobody asked me what I wanted to do when I was a youngster. But I had the opportunity to come into this fine establishment here. Been here since the Fairmont days.
Since the Fairmont, how many years is that, Carl?
Ooh, that's about what? I'd say about 16 years ago. I was given a job as a pot washer, and I used to help the cooks do what they had to do. So I asked the banquet chef, which his name was Benny Diaz. I asked him to move me to a cook's position because I did help out when I didn't have no pots to do. So they gave me an opportunity, and I ran with it.
What's your day like here, Carl? You come in at 4 a.m. and what do you do at 4 o'clock in the morning?
Well, sometimes I'm a banquet cook, so we have banquets. And we have banquets for maybe 2 to 4 people, 10 to 12 people, 12 to 24 people, and 24 to 100 and some people. So we do banquets, lunch, and dinner.
So everything you've learned, you learned on the job.
Correct.
The chicken? Now, how did you learn the chicken?
Well, working in banquets, I just figured I wanted to do something different with the chicken at the time of the Fairmont. And they gave me the opportunity to do so, and I did something different, and everybody liked it. So now we're trying to do something here at the Roosevelt with this chicken thing before I retire.
So, Carl, I understand that part of the fried chicken story goes back to a Mardi Gras.
Yeah, the Roosevelt knew I knew how to fry chicken good, and it's something that we wanted to promote for Mardi Gras season. What we did was we fried chicken upstairs, and we sold it out the restaurant that's over there, that's on the other street over there. And we gave a bucket of chicken to everybody that was staying in the hotel, a bucket of chicken and a can of beer, whatever. And it sold well. Favorite thing I like to be creative with is chicken, because there are major things you can do with chicken. I know about 700 and something 99 pieces of way to do something with chicken. You can do a lot with chicken.
What are some of your other things? What are your other chicken tricks?
I can't tell you. You got to sign a contract with the Roosevelt. And yeah, I'm sincere. We got to sign papers.
It's secret. Okay.
Yeah. But what I want to present to the judges on at the Fried Chicken Festival is I want to serve them with something different, something you never heard of. You say you cook before. You told me that earlier.
Yeah, I'm a cook.
But it's something that I want to present to them. I could tell you, because you can't do it, even if I do tell you.
Oh, I'm sure I can't. You can, that's the thing about recipes. I tell people recipes. I tell them how to do things. But, don't you think some of this magic, Carl, is in your hands, not in your head?
It is. It is, because you know what? My co-workers, they're always lurking around me trying to see how I fry chicken. They can't do it, though. They try to. But what I'm going to do for the judges at the Chicken Fest, fried chicken and red beans and rice on a stick. It's the red beans and rice are stuffed inside the fried chicken on a stick. Can it be done? It's been done by me.
Well, you are something else.
I sure am. Thank you, though. Thank you for recognizing.
Well, I have a feeling you and your chicken are going to go far. And I'm thrilled that I had this chance to get this behind-the-scenes look and taste. I can hardly wait to taste that chicken. Oh, my goodness, this is life-changing good chicken, Carl.
I'm glad it's changing your life right about now, dear.
Oh, my goodness, it is. There is no chicken in my lifetime that's going to ever measure up to this moment. You've ruined me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being ruined.
Thank you, Carl.
You're so welcome.
That's Chef Carl Cushenberry of the Roosevelt Hotel. That's it for this week's edition of Louisiana Eats, edible content for Louisiana food lovers. Have you visited poppytooker.com lately? That's where you'll find not only our full broadcasts, but our quick bites for podcasting or webcasting and special videos from producers Jonathan Evans and Marion Gay. That's all on poppytooker.com. Louisiana Eats is made possible with major support from Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen, Zatarain's, and from Camellia Brand Beans. Additional support for Louisiana Eats is provided by the Shreveport-Bossier Convention and Tourist Bureau and from Tableau, brunch and dinner daily with outdoor balcony dining overlooking Jackson Square. Original theme music composed by David Pomerleau and performed by Johnny Sketch and the Dirty Notes. Big thanks to senior producer Joe Schreiner and special projects manager Reggie Morris. And to our business manager and social media maven, Maddie Mullidew. come visit us anytime in our Louisiana Eats studios at the Southern Food and Beverage Museum. We're on Instagram and Facebook, too. Louisiana Eats is a production of Poppy Tooker Broadcasting.